Hello and welcome to the World Wanderers podcast, your source for travel stories, travel destinations, and travel philosophy.
I'm Amanda.
I'm Ryan.
And we're your hosts.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by you, the fans of the show. If you go to patreon.com/theworldwanderers, you can find out more about the cool bonuses and rewards we have for supporters of the show. You can sign up and get an interesting postcard from somewhere in the world or exclusive content. Just go to patreon.com/theworldwanderers to find out more.
And another quick announcement before we dive into this episode of the show. We have an awesome online community that we've just started separate to our Facebook page. And we would love for all of you out there who are listening to the podcast to join us. And so you can find that on the show notes at theworldwanderers.com, or you can just search World Wanderers, a community for travelers, and we'll get you access. And it's lots of like-minded people who enjoy traveling the world. There's travel bloggers, digital nomads, people from all over who are just talking about all things travel. So we would love to see you there.
Hello and welcome to the World Wanderers podcast. Today we have a splendiferous topic to discuss.
Yeah, and what's that splendiferous topic?
We're talking about the value of creating while you travel. Whether that is a travel blog, a travel podcast, some sort of practice around taking photos while you travel, or something else entirely. Just kind of getting into the value that we've gotten from not just approaching our travel as an experience in itself, but as an opportunity to practice something along the way. So I think a good place to start would be with our first trip and the way we approached that one. Neither of us started a travel blog, and we both actually just tried to implement a journaling practice where we would journal to keep track of our experiences. Do you know where that idea came from? I don't remember why I was like, I should journal about the places we're going.
I think maybe I encouraged you to. I was recently going through some stuff in my parents' basement. I don't have very much anymore, but there's lots of stuff from when I was little, and I actually kept a journal on my trip to Disneyland. And I kept a journal on my first 1 week trip out to Vancouver Island, where we took a road trip from my grandma's house to my uncle's house. And it's so funny. I bought this whole journal for it, and I used like maybe 6 pages. I think I was like 7 years old at that point. But it kind of just became something that I did. So I know for me, when I took my first trip to Europe, which was with my family, I kept a journal and I wrote about that trip. And then when I went on my second trip to Europe, which was with 2 of my university roommates, I also kept a journal. So I feel like when we set out on our 6-month backpacking trip, it just seemed like something I would do, keep a journal. And I think that maybe I encouraged you to do that. I can't really remember, but I actually kept a journal throughout the entire time while we were traveling. You kind of went off and on with it. Is that right?
Yeah, I think I stuck with it for like the first kind of month and a half, 2 months, faded out, tried to start again, eventually stopped. Just couldn't get into the habit of doing it. And although I did have lots of good times where I would kind of write out some deeper thoughts for kind of one of the first times in my life where I was really thinking things through and writing about them. As a kind of a practice to deepen my thinking on things. But for me, it's always seemed kind of like traveling was an opportunity to go learn things. So because you are leaving home, it's like, okay, I need to make sure like my eyes are wide open. I need to make sure that I'm taking in the lessons that I'm learning around me. I don't know where I got that idea from, but something about that trip was just, well, I should have a journal. I should be writing about the places we're going.
I think it's, I mean, our podcast is kind of like a verbal journal now that we share with other people. But
verbal?
Verbal? Yeah. A spoken journal, one may say. But I think that having a way to, write out a day or talk out a day, or, maybe it's using a social media platform, the way Rory Madigan does, where he writes these really in-depth posts on Instagram about the photos that he takes, about the days that he's having, whatever it is. I feel like it's a good way to kind of recap your day and kind of just go over it, because when you're traveling and your days are really open, so much can happen. I mean, the difference between traveling and having a day where you have no responsibilities or nothing you need to do, and your day at home is so different. You forget how many hours there are in a day when you're not spending 8 hours at a workplace, plus a lunch break, plus whatever your commute is, plus maybe whatever you do after work, like the gym or whatever, plus eating. I mean, that sucks up most of your waking hours, and then you feel like your spare time is so scarce. And when you're traveling, you have so much spare time. And for me, being able to capture that in some ways is an important practice.
So then when we came back, I don't think we used those first journals really at all until we started podcasting and went back and looked at them. But the second time we went traveling, we did our 6-month trip to South America, of course, and you decided to start a travel blog at that point. Can you talk about where that idea came from and what was the motivation initially behind it? Maybe the stated motivation, but also like the background motivation behind what you really wanted out of it.
Yeah, for sure. So on my first trip, I found that I spent a lot of time writing really in-depth emails to family and friends back home. And for me, it's like I would just share whatever was happening in that moment. So if somebody emailed me in a certain country, I would email them all about, maybe the week or two prior, what we're up to and our plans for the future. And because it was my life, I didn't really think about how these people were getting bits and pieces of my trip. And when I came home, I was in a group of friends and somebody said something that they knew about my trip, and another person went, "Oh, I didn't know that you even did that or saw that." And this was like pre-Instagram, so I wasn't posting continuously. I'd post some albums on Facebook. Some people would look, some people wouldn't. At that point, my grandparents weren't on Facebook. My parents weren't really on Facebook. So I spent a lot of time just writing these in-depth emails. And I kind of thought the second time around, I'm going to, write in a journal, but I'm going to put it for everyone. So it's going to be something where if somebody sends me an email and asks me where I am, they can very clearly go to my travel blog. I can send them the link, this is what we're up to, and then maybe give them some other personal details that I haven't shared. So that was kind of the stated reason. And then I think I fell in love with traveling the first time. And when we came back, I really wasn't happy with life. And I was like, maybe if I start a travel blog, I can make it in the travel industry, and maybe one day I'll be a travel blogger. So I feel like that was kind of something that I was like not directly trying to achieve, but I was like, oh, maybe, if somebody else other than my grandparents and my mom and dad read this blog, that'd be really cool.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I didn't know that second part about it. I remember at the time thinking, I didn't know about travel blogging as a thing. And I remember just thinking, who's going to want to read a blog about, what we're doing? I think at times you were like, oh, well, you could start a travel blog or a blog to write about it. I was like, oh, no one's going to care what I have to think. And it's interesting now, given where we've gone. So what was that experience like, traveling and having this kind of commitment that you made to yourself to blog and keep updated along the way?
I really enjoyed it. And I think, this is what we're going to get into more in this episode, but having something that I'd committed to where I was like, I said I was going to do this for myself and for my family and friends. And, now I've got to do it, kind of kept me on track with, okay, I've got something to do today. So I remember days where, I would pour coffee in the morning and I would sit down and I'd write for an hour or two on my iPad, or I would write while I was on the plane or on a bus or a train. And I felt like it was really nice having this kind of tasks for me to do. And I really enjoy writing, so it was a fun thing for me to do. It was a fun practice. And then it was really fun when I would get emails from people who said, oh, I've been following along with your travel blog. And by people, I mean like my grandparents and my parents and my friends. Very few strangers reached out to me. I did have one stranger who was like, oh my gosh, I found your travel blog. And I was like, holy crap, somebody's reading this thing. But it was just neat having friends be like, oh, I've been following you along. I know everything you've been doing, because it kind of achieved everything that I wanted it to achieve. So I really enjoyed it. It gave me a sense of purpose, and it allowed me to do something that I really enjoy doing.
Yeah. And so for me, the second time we traveled, I brought a bunch of journals again, but I was really a lot more open to the fact that I didn't really like simply just journaling about the places we were going to and the things we were seeing. So I did a ton of journaling about other aspects of my life, about things I was thinking about introspection and stuff like that. But I wasn't actually writing much about okay, we went here today and did this and saw this. And I kind of realized that I have a really hard time motivating myself to do that, but I would just open myself up to write about things. I have a lot to say and to think about, and was getting a lot of value from it.
Yeah. And what do you think that value was, other than kind of like, peeling away the layers of yourself?
We're kind of trained to believe that you learn things by consuming things. So that's kind of what you do in school. Maybe you like regurgitate some stuff occasionally in school for tests and essays. But so much about learning is actually creating something. And so much of your thinking is clarified by actually writing about it instead of going out to find new ideas. It's actually writing about what you think and what's going on in your life. So yeah, I just think that so much of my ideas about my life, what I want out of life, the world, came out of just taking lots of time to think and write about what was on my mind. There's so much stuff that's kind of just floating around your head, and if you just start writing it out, whatever's on your mind, you'll kind of be surprised at where you end up and how far you can go.
Yeah, I think you touched on something important there as well, because it's something we've covered in a couple different podcast episodes. But our second trip, we kind of found that after, what would you say, like 4 to 6 weeks, we had a little bit of like boredom almost.
Yeah, just a lack of fulfillment.
Yeah, that's probably a better way of putting it, because like we were doing lots of things and seeing lots of amazing things, but I feel like because we slowed down the trip and the intention was different than our first trip, and I think there's actually less kind of, I don't know, I guess list type items to see in South America. Like there's lots of really amazing nature and experiences to have, but I found like being in a city such as London, my list of things I wanted to see was so long that I didn't have time to sit down and just write. Whereas being in South America, we would arrive in a lot of different places and there'd be a couple things I wanted to see or do. And then we had lots of time if we stayed a couple extra days. But having something to, create or work on, like a travel blog or a travel podcast, or something to learn, like a language, can add a lot of fulfillment to your trip.
Yeah, and it turns it from this thing where you're just going out and saying like, okay, I'm going to have an experience that's nice and enjoyable and pleasant, but kind of turns it into like a mission where you're going out to do something, whether that's, like you said, learning a language, maybe it's writing a book. And I think so much of the ideas around creating content, whether that's us deciding to start a podcast, you deciding to start a blog, or maybe even deciding to write a book, we have this idea in our head that it should be other focused. So I've talked to people in the past before about podcasting and have said things like, why don't you just start a podcast? You've got interesting stuff to talk about, and who am I to do that? Or who am I to start a travel blog is kind of what my thought was initially. And we forget the value, the personal value that comes from going out and engaging in these things. So especially when it comes to travel, maybe no one is interested in reading the book that you write about your experience. But if you go to South America and you have this idea in your head that you're going to write a book about it, and you kind of internalize all your experiences and document them in a way that eventually leads you to writing a book, you're going to get so much personal value out of that, just from the learnings you get along the process, and then having that to look back on later in life, and having that for people who care about you to read, even if it doesn't become popular or anything like that. And the same thing applies to a blog. If you can really focus on it, commit to it, and go through and follow through, you're going to get so much personal value. Your writing's going to improve, your organization's going to improve, your kind of self-confidence and creative self-esteem will improve. And then plus, in the future, you have this thing that you can go back on and read and reminisce about your experiences.
Yeah, for sure. I think also you brought up, learning to take better photos, and I know that's something that you did in Asia, which became kind of fulfilling, because it makes, something like that makes going out and seeing stuff more exciting, because you've got sort of this intention behind it, where it's, I want to get some good photos, or I want to try this new lighting technique, or I want to play around with this exposure, or whatever it is. That's another cool thing to do. And then something else that I also did was, when we were in South America, I actually bought a drawing journal and pencil crayons, and I started drawing for the first time since I was a little girl. And it's one of those things that I did for hours and I loved when I was younger, but it kind of got I don't know, just squashed out of me, or I just stopped doing it because it was so busy with school and university and work and life. And it was really fun. It was really, really interesting to rediscover that. And I mean, I'm certainly not going to get famous off of my picture of a toucan, but it's like an enjoyable experience to have.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in just thinking about different places to go, or thinking that your time spent traveling has to be really travel related, doing things that you couldn't do at home. But like we've talked about on the show so many times, a big advantage of travel is just the space you have. So it's a great opportunity to kind of take up things that you've wanted to do at home, but haven't had the time or the space or the energy to do because of all your other responsibilities. So maybe that's, learning how to draw. It's really easy to bring some crayons or pencils and pens and a notebook.
Crayons.
Is that not what people draw with these days?
I don't think so. Maybe like if you're 5. I mean,
I was gonna say pencil crayons.
Yeah, pencil crayons are better. Adult coloring books are like all the rage, though. That's like the new meditation.
Yeah. So we've kind of discussed the value that you can get out of having a practice like this, about, bringing some sort of creativity to your trip. But obviously it's easy to have those ideas. And we both had things like, oh, I'm going to start drawing. And then you buy a book that never gets used.
Or used like 4 times.
Or same with journaling, same with blogging. How do you go from someone who has an idea like that to someone who is at the end of the trip and has actually accomplished it consistently?
Yeah, so I think that's an interesting topic to kind of delve into, because I think that, so one, when you are having this experience, it's kind of fun to play around with different things. So maybe it's like, oh, I'm going to write about my travels and maybe write a travel book. And maybe you get halfway into it and you realize that you don't feel inspired to do that, or you're not enjoying it. You're like, you know what? I'm actually going to make a compilation of drawings of my travels instead. And then you start doing that. So I think that it's kind of finding this balance between doing these things for yourself, maybe setting goals with them, and maybe following through, maybe not. I feel like I'm not communicating my point entirely, because I think there is value in following through, but I think there's also value in kind of just like, dabbling, I guess you could say. Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I think that part of the process is learning what you like. And so when you go out and you say, oh, I've always wanted to write a book, and you maybe go and finally have the space to do that since you're traveling, and you start doing it and you're like, actually, my life is a lot worse now that I'm trying to do this. Maybe I just loved the idea and I don't actually love the practice. So I think it's important to have, the flexibility and the relationship with yourself when you can quit something like that. But on the other hand, basically everything you're going to try to do in life that is meaningful is hard, and will reach a point where you just don't want to do it. And if you don't have that commitment in advance, the chances of you doing it are very, very low.
Yeah, for sure. So I think that, so I've gone both ways. Like I've continuously, have these moments where I get inspired to paint or draw, and I buy supplies and I do it for a little bit, and then I'm like, okay, I'm kind of done with it. It's like I like it more in my head than I actually like doing it, but I get enjoyment when I do it, but I don't crave to do it all the time. Whereas with my travel blog, I had no issues just sitting down and writing. Like there was definitely days where I was resistant, or there'd be times where I'd been like 5 days and I had lots to write about, where it felt overwhelming to write about everything. And I had some resistance, but I don't know. It's kind of one of those things. Like I just told myself, I spent a lot of time thinking of a name for it. I bought the domain, which is actually just my name. I picked out a theme. I spent money on it. I learned how to use WordPress all by myself, which I was very not patient with technology at that point. So that was like a big kind of hurdle that I overcame to get this travel blog up and running. And I just told myself, like, I'm going to blog for the entire 6 months that we're away.
And then did you have an actual like once a week commitment, or did you just do it based off location? How did you approach it?
I just did it based off location. So I wanted to write at least one blog post about every place that we went. So every city. And sometimes we spent longer in places. So like the Galapagos Islands, for example, we were there for a week. So I wrote 2 blog posts about that, because we were doing stuff every single day. And I felt like that would have been the world's longest blog post if I'd written that in one. And it's also easier to write about 3 days in one go than it is to recap a week. So I tried to write every couple of days. I would say every 2 to 3 days I was writing.
Yeah. And so I think blogging in particular or podcasting are really good ways to, are really good projects to take on, because you kind of mix in, it's not gigantic, right? It's an incremental process. So writing a book is this long project, and it's easy to kind of get stuck at any point in time and get lost in it. Versus blogging, you just need to write a post once every couple of days and put it out there, or maybe once a day. So it's incremental. But because you're blogging or you're podcasting, you're putting it out to the world, and it kind of creates this external social motivation. So with journaling, it's easy to give up on because you're the only person who cares if you stop journaling. But people will remind you if you stop blogging. People will remind you if you stop podcasting. And so the same thing applies with a book. You can give up on a book and quit because no one knows you're writing it other than a few people. But if you're blogging and you can just consistently put those blog posts out day after day after day, then at the end of the trip, you can take that to put it together in a book and do some editing to make it more of one full story instead of a bunch of small stories. But those two in particular, I think, are great pursuits. Then you can also do stuff like make a goal or commitment to post one photo a day about your travels with kind of a description of what's going on, and create a blog that way.
Yeah, definitely. I think that you made an important point there. Like, I think that having that external motivation is really key, because I think that is the difference between me completing my blog and not completing my drawing. Like, I never set a goal for drawing. I was just like, it'd be fun to draw again. I'll go buy supplies for $10. And then, I drew every day for like 4 days and then never picked up that book again, and probably gave away those pencil crayons at some point.
Yeah. And so I think that, the value of creating while traveling and kind of being a bit disciplined about it has always been there, and it's always been a valuable thing to do. But I think especially so now with the way technology is. And so the idea behind this is, in the past when you would go traveling, you had to disconnect. You were forced to. You couldn't stay connected to your life at home. Now you can leave home physically, but still very much be home mentally. You can go out during the day in Colombia and come home at the end of the day and hop on Facebook, hop on Instagram, hop on Snapchat, go on YouTube, and just, spend 5 hours and not actually get involved in anything that's really making you better as a person. Which you're kind of forced to do in the past because you had all this time. You kind of had to just sit with yourself and were forced to introspect. But now you don't. So I think it's more important than ever to go into it with a conscious commitment to something. Like, okay, I'm going to write a blog post once a week or once a day or every other day, or something else like that, so that when you come home at the end of the day after seeing something on your trip, although the temptation is there to just do what you would do at home and watch videos or go on social media, you feel like, okay, no, I've got something I want to do that's more important to me. And you can get started on it, and then you can get kind of lost in it and build a new habit that way. Yeah,
I think that is the same as if you have something that you're working towards, like learning a language, or I was just thinking about how creating can also be like not just drawing or painting or something digital. It can also be like making jewelry or something like that. That's something that we've seen a ton on the road and that people actually use as a revenue stream. I don't think they make a ton of money out of it, but you can pay a little bit for supplies. You can get really good at making bracelets or necklaces or earrings or something like that. Really, really fun way to create something cool, and then you could actually sell it to other travelers or at a market or something like that, or just on the street if that's your scene. But I think that anything that you can do to kind of maybe not necessarily with the intent of making income, but anything you can do where you're creating something gives a lot of like internal fulfillment. It's like, wow, I made this bracelet, and then to have somebody be like, whoa, I want to buy that is really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when we came back from our trip in 2014, we decided that we were going to start a podcast. And this wasn't really like a travel project because we moved to a new city and we're kind of settled in. It wasn't really traveling. But it's now been 3 years and we've done a lot of podcasting while traveling, and we've just gotten so much more value, I feel like, out of the travel because of this creative outlet we have and this thing that we take with us. And it's kind of cool too for me to think about it just being like this experience bank, like being able to go back 10 years from now and listen to our episode about Singapore and, go live that again. So would you say that podcasting has added to travel for you in the same way that blogging did, or how has it kind of interacted with your travel experiences?
Yeah, definitely. If I think about my experiences on our first backpacking trip in 2011, where all I did was keep a journal, which I didn't look back in till we started podcasting, versus my time in South America where I kept this travel blog up, I feel like my experiences are so much more tangible. They're so much more like, I remember how I was feeling in this moment, in this place, doing this thing. And I got a little bit of that back as I read through my journal, and we, kind of recaptured those memories in podcast form. But I feel like so much of our travels is so much more alive with me because we've had those conversations about them. And I think that's something that's been really cool about co-hosting a podcast, is that we get to have these conversations together where we can have these moments where it's like, oh, you felt that way, you liked this thing, you didn't. Like, of course we had those conversations on the road, but we just had them way more in depth while podcasting. So I think that there has been a ton of value about recapping on that stuff. And also, I think that something that's really valuable about having some sort of way to diary your experiences is that when you look back on it, you can really see how it impacted you, or how it helped you grow, or the personal development you got from it, or the way that experience really affected your life in a bigger way. Because I think that when you're having those experiences, it's not as clear to be like, oh, this experience is changing me right now. It's like, no, you look back on it and you're like, wow, that was a really pivotal moment for me, or that experience really changed my outlook, or it really impacted the way I see the world or myself or the other people around me, or something like that. So I think that those are some of the big values that I've gotten from podcasting.
And I think there's something great too about starting something new as a creative project, because it can lead you down all sorts of roads that you didn't know you were going to go down. So when we started podcasting, didn't really have much of a future vision for it, but it's led to so many cool opportunities. And those opportunities have led to other opportunities, and those opportunities have led to friendships, and the podcast has led to friendships. And so much good value in our life has come out of just deciding like, okay, let's just make a podcast where we talk about travel once a week. And it's just like a magnet brought all this cool stuff into our life, as well as just helping us build new skills that are really interesting and valuable in ways that I couldn't have predicted at the start. So couldn't recommend something like blogging or podcasting or any other creative pursuit enough. So if you guys are about to start a trip and you're setting up a travel blog, definitely send us a link. We'd love to check it out to find out more about you and your experiences. If you're someone who's started a podcast about your travels, we'd love to check it out. So definitely send it our way.
Yeah, so you can email us at info@theworldwanderers.com or join our private Facebook group. It's World Wanderers Community for Travelers. You just have to get approval. We'll let you in. You can share that link there. And we would love to hear from you.
As always, thanks for listening, and we will see you next time.
Ciao.
To find more information, relevant links, and photos talked about in this week's episode, check out theworldwanderers.com.
If you have a question, comment, or feedback, send us an email at info@theworldwanderers.com. Join our community on Facebook at The World Wanderers or on Twitter at WorldWanderers1. As always, thanks so much for listening.
Have a great day.
Bye.